Hello and welcome back to another episode of A Weekly Waypoint. Today we are playing the Elder Scrolls Online, however that is not going to be our primary topic. We may talk more about it later, but for now it's just background footage. We're doing the Vault of Madness dungeon. That is what the Dungeon Finder has chosen for us today. And I am leveling up my Arcanist, who I haven't played in months, so bear with. No, today I would like to talk to you about a video game that I'm playing, a new purchase that I've acquired on a whim that has quickly grown to become something that I like very much indeed. This will be a spoiler-free discussion, so don't feel like you have to go anywhere, but I would like to talk to you about Final Fantasy 16, or at least the first 12 hours of it. That's right, the other day I was on Steam and I noticed that Final Fantasy 16 was only £35, which was surprisingly cheap because I thought that game came out like last year, which it did on PC, but actually came out in June of 2023 on PS5. Still, I decided to pick it up because it's one of those games that when it got announced, I was like, that game looks really cool and I want to play it, but no way am I going to be able to play it for a long time, so I am putting it out of my mind. Then fast forward like a year and a half. Is that how that works? Yeah, like a year and a half and a bit more. And you have me looking at it going, oh, wait, I could get that now. Ooh, I could play that now. Now, Final Fantasy 16 is about 170 gigabytes, so I did install it to my external SSD in the hopes that it would run fine from there. And it does for the most part, but not gonna lie, there are a few times when it has unfortunately been bottlenecked by the fact that it is an external SSD, and my PC has struggled to load everything in time, and I've missed a few visual moments in the bigger, like, giant icon fights. For those of you who don't know, the premise of Final Fantasy 16 is basically centered around the summons of Final Fantasy as these like gigantic beings called icons. I believe they've been called icons in the past. I believe they're called icons in Final Fantasy 14, depending on who's talking about them. And they've been a staple of the franchise for a very long time, and this time around they are front and center in the story, and yeah, it's really cool. I think that is the main thing that I have to say about Final Fantasy 16. It's really fucking cool. It just is. It's just, you know, it's clearly a game built around spectacle, but like, goddamn does it do spectacle well. If you couldn't tell, this is going to be a gush. This is going to be a hell of a gush. And I know, before we get too far into things, I know I'm 12 hours into the game. I now have a track record of not finishing RPGs, mostly if they're single player. I don't know why, but MMOs tend to keep me around for a bit longer. And I could still very much be in the honeymoon period with this game. I did look up reviews before I bought it, and I have seen, the main criticism seems to be that the side quests kill the pacing and can be rather dull, but I've done a bunch of side quests at the start of a game already, and I actually really like them so far. Compared to other RPGs, the world isn't absolutely littered with them, at least not so far. I have been warned that the amount of side quests ramps up towards the end of the game, but so far I've noticed that the side quests are kind of used, you know, sparingly, that's the word, sparingly. And yeah, they're like really base level stuff, like, could you go and grab some wood for me? And I can see how some people might be taken aback after doing these gigantic monster fights that they're suddenly just going and collecting wood for some random guy. But what I found these side quests to be so far are these brilliant bits of just extra world building. If you just want to take a second and go do this diversion, it's a little bit of extra world building. You get to see the kind of people who live in this kind of place, and how they feel about the kind of jobs that they do, and so far I've done every single one that's popped up and I haven't regretted a single one, even though they are inarguably, you know, lower stakes, slower paced things. I've also been told that these side quests kind of build over time and that they become more involved and that they kind of become sequels of themselves and stuff, so that's cool. But I have put the side quest before the main quest here. Apologies. The main quest, again, no spoilers, but so far I'm really enjoying it. The story hasn't done anything insane. It's more about the execution of the story that they are telling that is really cool, I think. Final Fantasy 16 definitely feels like an RPG that wouldn't have been able to exist, you know, 10 years ago. Just the sheer scope of, you know, the giant monster fights and how it affects the ground troops and that kind of thing. It really does feel like a next generation game in a way that I don't think I've really experienced since, you know, the PS5 and Xbox Series X came out. Which may sound like high praise to you, and that's because it is. Maybe it's just because I spend the bulk of my time playing MMOs, which were, made primarily back like over 10 years ago, like ESO. But goddamn, does Final Fantasy 16 just feel like a step above. The protagonist is likable, the lore is interesting, the combat, we haven't really touched on that yet. Final Fantasy 16 bills itself as the first fully fledged action RPG within the series, to which I go, wait a minute, didn't 15 also do that? But anyway, I was a little concerned because, I don't think I've played a huge amount of action RPGs, at least not unless they're Diablo-style games. And my brain went straight to Tales of Arise, which I really enjoyed, but had a lot of trouble with in terms of difficulty, and I'm not the only one. Though I did go back and find out that I could have just turned the difficulty down to easy mode, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I'm happy to report that Final Fantasy XVI's difficulty feels perfectly balanced. So far in my 12 hours, I've only had one death, one game over, I guess I should say, and that was mostly because I kind of thought I was expected to lose that fight, so I wasn't really giving it my all. Turns out, no, I was not expected to lose that fight. But no, I was saying this to some friends in my Final Fantasy XIV FC, because, I guess for context, for those of you who don't know, this was made by the same people who make Final Fantasy XIV, the MMO, the popular MMO, for those of you who really don't know much about Final Fantasy. I said to them, this game does the same thing Final Fantasy XIV does to me, where it presents me with a boss which intimidates me, and that I look at, or that I look at the moveset of, and I think there's no way I'm going to be able to beat this, and then I beat it in one try, and it's difficult, but it's extremely rewarding. I feel like a badass whenever I take down one of these bosses, and they're so fun. I was a little worried because I don't have a huge amount of experience in games where it's important to look out for boss tells and stuff like that to dodge when they start to like raise an arm to hit you or whatever. Like there's a lot of that in Dark Souls types games, and I don't play many Dark Souls type games. But no, I've already got to the point where I'm just kind of doing things naturally, to the point where I just feel, like a badass. Like the game's supposed to make you feel, because it's just clicking. And the combat does start off a little slow's not the right word, simple. It starts off a little simple. I was definitely kind of like, oh okay, I get it, I'm pressing X X X X to do a sword combo, followed by X X X X to do a sword combo, but you do gradually start unlocking things. And all I'll say is, when I unlocked the L2 button, I started cackling, and now I've unlocked the L3 and R3 button, and it's gotten even better. I guess one thing I could say is abilities started off as something that felt like they would be used sparsely and when needed, and now it feels like I have enough abilities that I don't feel like I'm worrying about cooldowns too much. I'm not just spamming sword strikes too much. And also the game has a really cool thing, and it's, it probably didn't invent this, I'm sure this has been seen in other action RPGs, but it's got a really cool thing where if you dodge at the perfect time, you can then do a counter strike, which, contrary to popular belief, does not involve buying guns and then trying to stop the terrorists. No, it's just an extra powerful smack that you do, and the animation's real nice. And, a lot of this stuff comes down to, and the animation's real nice, and it feels nice to press the buttons. But yeah, it's really super interesting to me that Creative Studio 3, who made Final Fantasy XIV, also made this game, because you find yourself looking for tells, like little things. Like obviously 16 is a very different game to 14. 14 is an MMO, the combat's completely different, all this stuff. Whereas 16 is kind of like, 14's a mainline entry, but 16's like a mainline single player RPG entry to the Final Fantasy series. And so, I look for little tells that this is made by the same people, and I can find it in like how some of the camera movements work in cutscenes, and like how when you hand over an item in a side quest, you kind of do the same thing that you do in 14, where you kind of click the item and click hand over. Comparing Final Fantasy 14 to Final Fantasy 16 is a little bit like comparing Spyro the Dragon to Ratchet and Clank. They're very different games, but there are little tells where you go, oh yeah, this was made by the same devs. And for those of you who don't know, I adore Final Fantasy 14. And I was thinking about, again, this could be honeymoon period talking, but I was thinking about how I don't think I've played a game this good since maybe Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers, which I played a couple of years ago at this point. I don't think a game has had this much of a hold on me since Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. So I guess what I'm saying is, Creative Studio 3, I like what you've got going on. I also just found out that they made the Dragon Quest Builders games, which kind of tickles me, because those games are great too. And I don't know if it's literally the same people. I don't exactly know do they have different teams within Creative Studio 3 and there's like not a lot of crossover or whatever, but I do know that Yoshi P was the main guy, the producer, the executive producer, the I don't know how this works, game director, whatever his title is. He was that on both 14 and 16. I just want to know if Yoshi P did Dragon Quest Builders. I'm sorry, but I do have one last thing to gush about regarding Final Fantasy XVI, and that's the soundtrack. Of course it's the soundtrack. Masayoshi Soken, who does most of the soundtrack for Final Fantasy XIV, also does most of the soundtrack for Final Fantasy XVI, and I adore his work on 14, and so I was really excited to hear what he made for 16, and I am not disappointed. Obviously, I'm not looking too far into the soundtrack while I'm still playing the game, because, titles might give vague indications of spoilers to come and such, but as I've been sharing my experience with my FC, they have been telling me the names of some of the soundtracks of the big boss fights I've been doing. And the game opens with a great big boss fight, or at least kind of like a hint of a great big boss fight. And the soundtrack for that is called Away, and Away is goddamn incredible. It's kind of been playing in the back of my mind since I've first heard it. It's so fraught and frenetic, and I can't get across to you how good it is unless you just go and listen to it yourself. So if you are interested, go and look up Away by Masayoshi Soken. And I don't know just if it will have as much of an effect on you without the context of the scene within the game, but I'm willing to bet you'll at least like it. I also really like the track for the second big boss fight, which I will not spoil, but I will say I really like how it incorporated one of the motifs from that boss's 14 version. And then there's a track called Find the Flame, and oh man, okay, I gotta stop talking about this because I got no more words. It's just too good. Anyway, gosh, that's enough gushing about Final Fantasy XVI. If you have not played the game and you listen to all of that, thank you. I hope I've convinced you to give it a look. Oh, also one last thing, I did end up buying the expansions because I heard that they take place before the end of the main story, and it kind of doesn't feel great to go back and play them afterwards, so I've done that. Also, all this kind of Final Fantasy XVI talk has kind of got me looking over at Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I do own and have played the first 6 hours of, and I'm like, I should give that another go. Maybe when I finish 16, if I do finish it all in one kind of like, not sitting, but we gotta find a word for like one period of time within a week or two. Anyway, if I do finish 16 in a timely manner and I'm hungry for more Final Fantasy, I know Rebirth has just come out on PC, and the reviews are only mixed. I think they're mixed, or they might just be mostly positive because of some porting performance problems. But I should give Remake another go. I was enjoying it, I just bounced off it. Anyway, enough of that. What else have I been playing this week? Well, I did dip my toe into No Man's Sky because Worlds Part 2 just came out, and I don't know if you, viewer, were around on the channel when Worlds Part 1 came out, but I went through like a hyperfixation period on No Man's Sky when that happened. I'm kind of just waiting for the expedition to start before I really sink too much time into this update. But I do really like what they've added, such as, well, I haven't seen them myself yet, but gas giants always felt like they were kind of missing. And they've added an abandoned mode, which is basically the game without any sentient NPCs. There's still animals and stuff wandering around, but there's no Gek, there's no Vy'keen, I always forget which it is. There's no Korvax, I haven't tried to summon a Traveler yet, but I assume that's not a thing. And I'm not gonna lie, I fucking love that idea so much. Firstly, it's a fun challenge mode for a playthrough, but just the atmosphere it brings to the universe, it reminds me of my very opening moments in No Man's Sky the first time I ever played it, before I ever met any of these races, because back then the only time you could really meet them was on the space stations. And just as like it doesn't really come with a narrative per se, but from a narrative point of view, the idea of like being the only sentient creature left in the universe is so cool to me. I've actually wanted to write stories like that in the past, and may still do in the future. future. Just like what that would do to a person and the challenges they would face and that kind of thing. So cool! They've also added like purple stars or something. They've like populated the galaxies with new stars and like new biomes of planets and stuff. So yeah, it's a pretty major update that I definitely need to spend a bit more time with. I've also been continuing to play The Elder Scrolls Online, as you can see. That is today's game. We're currently leveling Vanir Arderil, my Arcanist, but I haven't actually really been leveling alts. I've just been kind of doing the event. As I mentioned last week though, I've not been focusing too much on the event itself, farming boxes or anything like that. I've mostly just been doing the narrative stuff. I finished the Rivenspire zone, and I had a great time doing so, and I'm excited to move on to the Alakir Desert. No, wait, hang on. Not the Alakir Desert yet, the one before that. Damn it. Bankarai, that's the one, I think. But yeah, I resubbed to ESO Plus eventually as well. I decided to go ahead and do that. This always happens. I'm like, wow, you don't even need ESO Plus to enjoy the game. And then I get ESO Plus, I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, finally. I can finally enjoy the game. I've also continued to play a little bit of Pokemon Brilliant Diamond. And I've been enjoying the new expansion in Pokemon Trading Card Game Pocket, although I've yet to really dive into, like, you know, anything beyond collecting the cards themselves. I haven't looked into like what each card does or like built any decks or anything like that. I haven't done any of the PvE missions yet. I don't know, I might be a little bit burnt out on that side of the game for now. Much as I do enjoy it, I think that that whole event where they're like, oh, consecutive wins level up your badge, that kind of I couldn't get the original badge. I couldn't get 2 wins in a row, and I tried like 12 or 13 matches or something, so that was a little upsetting, not gonna lie. But I don't know if that really put me off playing the game, or if I'm just a little exhausted from it, or what. You know my attention span, it comes and goes. Oh, actually one game I did get this week was Animal Crossing Pocket Camp Complete Edition, because the entry price was about to end, and it was about to double in price basically. I was never a huge Animal Crossing Pocket Camp guy. I did play it a little bit when it was a free-to-play game, but I do love the idea of a free-to-play game shutting down and then relaunching as a one-time paid thing, and then you have access to like everything microtransaction-y without having to pay money, because there's no microtransactions in the paid version of the game. But yeah, I picked it up on my iPad, and I've just been having a really nice time with it. It's super cozy, and I love that they've got this rotating event structure going on. Apparently it's like a 4-year cycle, so you're not going to run out of new events for at least 4 years, and realistically speaking, I'm not going to be giving the game my full daily attention every day for 4 years, so I think it's going to do me well. And you've got these limited time items and bits of clothing rotating in and out, and it's so cool, just like, you know, this sense of freedom of being able to get these leaf tokens without paying for them, but therefore you can just get loads of them pretty easily and spend them on loads of this stuff. It feels so unrestricted, it's nice. And so now it feels like an actual video game in a sense, and obviously it's not like any of the mainline Animal Crossing games. It is definitely still designed like a mobile game, don't get me wrong, but it does kind of scratch that itch, that Animal Crossing itch, I suppose, where you're talking to your animal friends, you're doing requests for them, that kind of thing. I recommend it, honestly, even for the full price that it's now at. It's just cozy. Speaking of cozy, well actually it's not cozy at all, it's pretty grim. I've been continuing my Daredevil rewatch, which I probably mentioned last week or maybe the week before. I have finished both the first 2 seasons, but then I realised that the story of the actual character does continue in an important way in The Defenders, so I'm having to watch The Defenders. Now I've always been pretty critical of The Defenders, despite liking its component characters, that being Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage and Iron Fist. I did enjoy all of their respective series, but I wrote down in my little kind of spreadsheet quick review that I thought that the coming together of all of them as the Defenders just felt really hammy and janky and not great. I've since learned that The Defenders seems to be quite well regarded, so I don't know why it didn't land with me, but I'm definitely kind of going in with more of an open mind this time around. I don't have time to rewatch Jessica Jones, Luke Cage and Iron Fist as well, unfortunately, before the Daredevil Born Again show comes out, so I've skipped those, despite really wanting to rewatch Jessica Jones, because that's a great show. So it is kind of interesting just going into The Defenders from like a Daredevil Season 2.5 perspective, and like all of these ancillary characters kind of being you know, they're there. Obviously I have knowledge of who they are and what happened in their respective stories because I have watched their shows, but it has been a while. Something that I'm noticing is all the Iron Fist stuff does feel like, super hammy. Like, that might be what my problem was with the Defenders in the first place. Iron Fist was quite a widely criticised show. I remember enjoying it at the time. But being exposed to Iron Fist, rephrase that. I think what bugs me is that Danny Rand is such an earnest character, but he's just so naive and just so like, you don't understand. I'm the Iron Fist. I've got to do this. I've got to fight the hand. And it's like, okay, bro, chill. And again, sorry, I should have mentioned, I'm not getting into spoiler territory here or anything like that. But yeah, I'm halfway through the Defenders, and I'm yet to reach a verdict on like how I feel about it. But you know, it is nice to see those characters again outside of my rewatch, I suppose. And finally, in terms of reading, I haven't really continued that much with The Shining. I do intend to. I finished part 1 because that book is split into separate parts. So my ADHD ass brain saw part 2 and went, oh, I can go do something else for a minute. That something else has mostly been continuing to read Demon in White, the 3rd book in the Sun Eater series. It's getting good. It was already good, but the structure of that book is a little bit weird in my opinion. We'll get into it in the blurble reasoning. But I did buy a book yesterday. I happened to notice that the first book in the Dresden Files was 99p on Kindle, and so I thought I'll grab that while I can because I'm interested in trying that series. I thought I might go for the Audible version of it because I hear that the Audible version is fantastic. People talk about the Audible version in the same way that people talk about the Audible version of The Wheel of Time, which of course is how I consumed that series. That's right, I didn't just read that series, I consumed it. I devoured it, I absorbed it, I made it part of my very being. But I gave the audiobook version of the Dresden Files a quick listen, and honestly, I can see why people like it, but I don't think it's maybe for me. Also, that version wasn't 99p, so that helped me make my decision. I'm still kind of trying to figure out what kind of books I want to listen to on Audible versus what kind of books I want to read myself. So far I've only done epic fantasy really, but I feel like that might be the wrong way round of doing things because epic fantasy tends to have lots of nouns and lots of lore that you kind of want to stop and like read at your own pace or reread when needed, like various paragraphs and stuff. But then I am also aware that if I was reading The Wheel of Time in text format, I'm not sure I would have got through it. But anyway, I'm recording this at the start of a week off, which means I have plenty of time to play more Final Fantasy XVI, watch more Daredevil, read more Sun Eater, and contemplate purchasing The Sims, which has just been re-released on Steam. I didn't get around to talking about that, but there's also that. People have been having technical difficulties with this bare bones re-release, which I just saw a headline might not be as bare bones as people think. Like, behind the scenes, apparently, they've done a bunch of work on it or something. But yeah, we owned The Sims when I was a kid, like the very first one. We only ever owned like the Pets expansion, I think. So I am legitimately tempted to just pick up The Sims 1 on Steam and hope it works for me. So who knows, maybe this time next week we might be talking about The Sims 1 instead. Anyway, there you go, one last just variable to throw into the conversation before the end. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you have a great week, and I will catch up with you next week, or I will see you... in whatever I make next. But also, if you're wondering where this week's edited video was, it was over on Dimension Jam. Go check that out. Okay, please, thanks. Okay, cool, bye.